This is a centrifugal filter. We call it a spin concentrator. It's an ultrafiltration device. Basically, it has a filter membrane in the center, but unlike filters for just getting rid of particulates, this has really tiny pores. So tiny that your protein can't go through it, but the salts and stuff can. And the buffer, whatever's in your buffer, typically can go through. And so what happens is you put your protein in this upper chamber, and then your protein stays up here because it can't go through the membrane, but all the liquid and all the stuff that's in your buffer, so all the salts and all that stuff, that's all going to flow through. And because all of those things that are in the buffer are flowing through, you're not changing the concentration of your buffer or anything, but you are increasing the concentration of your protein, because your protein is staying in this upper chamber, and then the liquid is going to go through with all the salts and buffer goodness stuff. And you could, even if you wanted to exchange the buffer, you can concentrate it down, and then you can add buffer, a new buffer that you want, and kind of like mix it up and down and concentrate it down and do that over and over to try to exchange the buffer that way. But we're just using it to concentrate it. So we're just going to concentrate it down and not resuspend it in another buffer. The way that we actually help things get through the membrane is by centrifuging it. When selecting one of these, you want to choose based on the volume of the solution that you need to concentrate, as well as the size of the molecule that you want to concentrate. So the membranes have different kind of pore sizes, and this makes it so that things that are bigger than the pore stay up here, and things that are smaller go through. And if your protein is really big, but the pores are really big, then your protein's going to go through. But if your protein's really big and the pores are really small, then your protein's not going to go through. And so you want to choose the molecular weight cutoff, or the MWCO, of a membrane that is going to be compatible with your protein. The MWCO, it kind of guarantees that a molecule above that size, 90% of it will be retained. So that is, it's kept in the upper chamber. It's part of what's getting concentrated, not what's going through. But that is kind of an average of pore size, and so their different proteins might still slip through, especially if those proteins have different shapes. And so you can use these not just for proteins, but also for DNA and RNA, and it's a big problem for those, especially because if you think about it, you've got this long linear molecule, and so yeah, it's got the same molecular weight as this one, but this one can really slither through, whereas this one's going to stay here. So you might need to check and make sure that your protein's not going through. And to make sure that your protein isn't going to go through, you typically want to choose a molecular weight cutoff that is kind of a third or less than the molecular weight of your protein or your other molecule of interest. And so say you have a protein that has a molecular weight of about 30 kilodaltons. So a kilodalton is just 1,000 grams per mole, because a dalton is a grams per mole. And so if you have a 30 kilodalton protein, then you're going to want to go 30 divided by 3 is 10, and choose a 10K, a 10,000 or 10 kilodalton, basically molecular weight cutoff membrane. And if your protein was, say, 100 kilodaltons, then you could go with 100 divided by 3. Okay, well, maybe now I can go up to the 30K membrane size, the molecular weight cutoff. Knowing that if I go to a higher molecular weight cutoff, then I'm going to risk losing my protein going through the flow through, but it can go faster. What you could do if you're concerned is you could actually keep the flow through that comes through, you could actually look and see, do a gel or something in order to see whether your protein is actually going through. And so you want to choose a molecular weight cutoff that is a third to a sixth of the size of the smallest thing that you're trying to concentrate. A quick rule of thumb is that if you take the length of your protein sequence in amino acids, divide that by 10, you get the approximate molecular weight of your protein. And so if you have a protein that is about 300 amino acids long, then 300 divided by 10 is going to be 30. And so it would be about 30 kilodaltons. And so I'd want to use a 30 divided by 3, 10 kilodalton molecular weight cutoff. Though sometimes you're kind of limited by the distinct size cutoffs that they have. And so there's commonly going to be 3 or 5 and 10, and then you're up to 30 and then 50 and then 100. I don't know how they choose the cutoffs, but they seem to be kind of random sizes. In terms of the volume, these guys typically hold about like 4 mils, I think. Like the ones that you have in like a 15 mil size. And then the ones with the 50 mil size, these are going to be like 15 to 20 mils. And then they have smaller ones for smaller volumes and bigger ones for bigger volumes. The different brands have the setups kind of different, but all of them are going to have that ultrafiltration membrane where your protein is non-penetrating, so your protein can't go through, but those other stuff can. In this one, it's kind of like in this paddle, and so there's kind of like a membrane on either side of this little chamber where things are going to go through. In some of them, you see like a V, and the membrane is on the V. This part comes out, and then you can like dump this out. But this also means that if your label is just on here, well, now you don't know what this is. If you're doing multiple proteins at a time, that's not going to be good. And so typically what you want to do is you want to actually label the insert as well as the outer tube and the lid, so you can tell what is the sample and what is the blank just from the top of the centrifuge. Typically what I do is I centrifuge it in spurts, because what happens is the protein can actually build up on kind of like a film on the membrane, and that's going to slow things down. So typically what I do is I centrifuge it for, like, depending on how much I want to concentrate it down, I might do, say, 15 minutes. And so after 15 minutes, what I do is I come in here with my pipette tip, and now I just want to pipette up and down to mix it and make sure that there's not any like viscous film forming on the membrane. It's good to kind of like go down the membrane when you're mixing it to kind of make sure you're getting anything off that was stuck on the membrane. Also, when you're doing those spurts, you're going to want to look and see if you see signs of aggregation. Sometimes if you concentrate proteins too much, they crash out. And so you might see these white flecks start occurring. And if that happens, then it's likely that you need to stop concentrating because your protein is getting lost a different way than if it were actually going through the membrane, but you're still losing your protein because it's crashing out. Don't freak out though if you see some flecks. Proteins, like the flecks, kind of like look a lot worse than it actually is a lot of the time. And so one thing that you can do too is kind of just keep checking the concentration of the protein as you're concentrating it. Make sure you're not going above what you know that the protein can't handle, or make sure that you're not kind of losing things that so if the amount of protein you think you have left over is a lot less than what you had started with, then it's either sticking to the membrane or it's going through the membrane. Either of those you don't want. What you do want is at the end, your protein is up here and the liquid is down here. You also, though, when you mix it, make sure don't touch the membrane. So don't actually touch the membrane with your tip. Just kind of go up and down along the surface and like that. Then at the end, you can kind of just take it out. And so there's different ones. Sometimes the small ones, you actually have to flip it over in order and centrifuge it again to get things to come out. There's something called a hold-up volume, and then there's like the dead volume. And so the hold-up volume, there's actually some liquid that you're basically gonna lose because it's stuck in here and things, and you can't get it out. And so I think the hold-up volume for these ones is like 80 microliters. So there's gonna be 80 microliters that you'll lose regardless. There's also the dead stop volume, which is the final volume that you would get if you just left it spinning forever, so it's not going to dry out. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't want it drying out. But the dead volume, the final volume basically that you could get would be, I think for this it's like 450 microliters. It depends on the size of your concentrator, and it depends on what type of centrifuge you're using. And so speaking of centrifuging, for these ones, for some of them it doesn't matter. For these ones with the paddle, you want to make it so that the paddle is actually going to be facing perpendicular to this axis. So it's basically, it's like this in line with here, and this in line with here. And so it's going to be like this or like this, but not like that. And that's gonna allow it to do its thing properly. The speed, so I typically just do max speed, but if you go fast, basically you risk losing the protein going through the membrane because you have more force that's helping. But as long as your molecular weight cutoff is okay, then you should be okay. The problem with going slower is then it goes slower. And so I've been concentrating this. I started concentrating you guys' earlier because I knew it would take a while because we were trying to go from 20 mils to 1 to 2 mils. And so I did an hour in 4 15-minute spurts, and we went from 20 mils to right now it's about 2.5. So we're almost there. Let's do the last spin. And the reason why we're doing this is so that we can get it concentrated for our size exclusion chromatography. So that's one of the main times you might use a spin concentrator, is to concentrate it in order to inject it onto your size exclusion column. Because unlike other forms of chromatography where the protein actually sticks to the column, and thus you can kind of like concentrate it, so wash everything else off and then kind of choose the volume you elute your protein in. With the size exclusion chromatography, it can only basically get more dilute as it goes through because it's not sticking, it's just traveling through the pores of the beads. And so we need to get it concentrated, and concentrated one so that we can fit it in the sample loop, but also so that our final sample is going to be concentrated. And if it's not very concentrated, then you're not going to get good resolution on the size exclusion chromatography. Sometimes we also concentrate proteins before we store them. So if you think about protein in a storage tube, you're going to lose some protein stuck to the walls of the tube. But if your concentration is high, then that's going to be kind of like a drop in the bucket, versus if you had a low concentration, then you're kind of losing a lot of it on the sides of the tube, which is not good. Proteins also tend to be stable at a higher concentration. I mean, not high enough that they're crashing, but at a slightly higher concentration. Having a little bit of crowding kind of helps the proteins not man spread. And yeah, so basically that's the basics of using these. You just stick your stuff in, go for a spin, protein stays here, other stuff flows through, do it in spurts, pipette up and down in between, check for signs of aggregation, and it helps to also like know going in what the concentration is of your sample and how much you have and things, and then make sure that you aren't exceeding. If you know what the concentration limit is, make sure you don't exceed that, and also make sure that you're kind of not losing protein along the way. Make sure that you do it with the centrifuge cold. So typically you want to do like a fast temperature spin, keep it up, get it to 4 degrees Celsius before you go. You're always going to want to have a balance, and so just like fill a old tube with the volume that's similar to the one you're using. And so once you use the tube, you can kind of just mark it and know that it's a blank. But you can also reuse these. And so typically what I do is I start by, when they come, they might have like a little bit of glycerol or something on the membrane as a preservative. So I put in the buffer that I'm going to use, and then just do a quick spin for a couple minutes to kind of wash the membrane. And at the end, what you could do is, if you want to reuse the membrane, you can actually just kind of wash it with 20% ethanol, store it in 20% ethanol, and then use it again. Typically, you want to use it only for the same protein as you've used in the past. So in case there's any kind of like residuals on there. Let's go finish it up and inject our protein. So when you come to take it out, you want to mix it and flow it down the membrane. Flow it against the membrane, that way you're getting anything that is kind of stuck on, and you want to do that to both sides. There you go. Try to be gentle, don't touch the membrane, just kind of go against the membrane. And try to avoid bubbles if you can, so just kind of be gentle. And then you can go and transfer it over to your tube. Measure the volume and the concentration before we inject, so we know kind of like what we're putting on there.